Okay, welcome. It's great to see all these smiley faces. As Dan said, my name's Craig Harvey. I'm a Dynamics or Business Applications Consultant here at Microsoft, so I'm out doing delivery of Dynamics projects for our customers. And for me, this topic around PowerApps and Flow is interesting given a lot of the changes that are happening in terms of product development and releases, so I thought it'd be interesting to take the user group through some of the key features and get you thinking about some of the scenarios where you can use this. So tonight my plan of attack really is to wow you with a few slides, lull you into a false sense of security, do some demos, come back to some slides, do another demo, and then calm you down with some slides at the end as well. I'm happy to take questions as you go through. If there's something that I've said too quickly or you want to back up, yell out. I'll try and keep the time and get you out of here by 7 o'clock. Question and answers we can run afterwards if we need to. So, Microsoft Dynamics 365 and the business application platform. So things such as sales and service and finance and operations and marketing, these are examples, I guess, of the applications that are part of the Dynamics platform now. And if they work for you as they are, then fantastic, but often you'll find that a lot of people in this room are probably involved in extending those, creating different customizations or configurations to extend those processes as you need. Now with the business application platform, there's a whole lot of other features you've got available to do that extension, and it can take it beyond just Dynamics. Indeed, you can now start to incorporate a whole lot of different data sources and trigger points for your logic across the enterprise. So let's get into talking about some of what that means. So the packaged applications, so sales, service, field service, project service automation, those things, they're going to be the fastest way for you to transform your business. If you can get them up and running, do a bit of configuration of your data and use them as they are. That's fantastic. But often in real life, it's not going to be exactly what you need, and you'll need to do some customizations to fit your particular business process or your industry. And sometimes there's no app at all, and so you need to sort of start from scratch and do a bespoke application to sort of incorporate integration points or go through a complex user scenario that's not catered for in those native Dynamics applications. So that's where the business platform, application platform comes into it. So the business application platform, really what I'm talking about here is PowerApps, Flow, Power BI, the Common Data Service, and data connectors. Now tonight I'm going to show you some PowerApps, some Flow, talk about the Common Data Service. That's about all we've got time for, so we'll go through that today. And really this is all linking your enterprise applications together for everything from web apps to mobile apps to your Office 365 apps, and then linkages through to Azure and also external things as well. So let's start talking about Flow. So what is Flow? Really, Flow is a series of logical steps that get executed. Flow is something that's designed through a web browser, and the idea is that it's self-service for our power users within the community to be able to start building a concept around automating some steps. So these steps could be used to do everything from simple integrations through to essentially repeating mechanical things and creating efficiencies by being able to create these flows themselves. Flow has a couple of key concepts. It has a thing called a trigger. What's going to start this? Is it going to be tied to when a record is created or when a record is deleted or when a new podcast episode is posted or when somebody tweets something mean about you? What are the things that are going to trigger your flow to actually run? They could be manually triggered as well, so people could create a library of flows, which is essentially logical steps, and then use them on a manual basis to either, from the button on their phone, say, I'm sick today, set them out of office, send some other notifications, through to running them manually to trigger some ad hoc import of some data. Flows can also be scheduled to run on a recurring basis. So you can set them up, set a schedule, have them running up in the cloud without you having to go back and monitor them all the time or kick them off manually. The logic within a flow could be anything from a simple linear process that says copy this record values over to this system, or it could involve a bunch of conditional logic where you've got if statements and loops and checking values against other systems to see if something exists, or transforming results and then munging them into a different format. The actions themselves, so that within a flow, these actions, the things that actually need to be performed, they can incorporate connections. And the connections really is from point A to point B, incorporation of another data source. And I'll show you the extensive gallery of connectors that we have. There's over 212 at the moment. If that doesn't suit your purposes, there's a custom connection and generic things such as HTTP requests that you can use. There's also an extensive gallery of templates available, and when your flow grows up and turns into a real boy, it can be promoted to an Azure Logic app. So citizen developers can start creating these flows themselves, automate their processes and do these things, and if it becomes a bit of a winning idea that you then want to share across the enterprise, you can promote that to an Azure Logic app. Flow itself is built on Logic apps, and so anything inside of Flow can be taken and promoted to that Logic app world. So what are some scenarios where you might use Flow? So, for example, a new record could be created which wants you to send a notification to somebody and then maybe create another record. You could be monitoring particular conditions to say, I've got an email from my boss, so generally do not disturb, but when my boss emails me, do something. Notify me, buzz my phone. You could collect data from things such as office forms. So you could have a scenario where a business user has come to you and said, oh, we're running this event in 2 weeks' time, we need to collect RSVPs. And you don't have any public portal to capture that. You could create an anonymous form, send a link out, have people respond, and then monitor those responses and put them into Dynamics, as well as generate emails and do other things. You could utilize things such as the Office graph inside of Flow. So you can, what that means is for Office 365 users, you can walk that stack and understand for this current user, who is their manager. So who do I need to route this to for approval? Give me a list of the recently used documents that they've created to help make the process a bit easier for them rather than have to go and find them. You can publish content on a schedule. You could have a bunch of content that gets created in the system and then reviewed and approved and then scheduled to be published when it needs to be. You can do ad hoc processing. So you can host Flow inside Excel. So if somebody comes to you with a spreadsheet of data that you need to do some transformation of and get it into Dynamics or into another system, you can have a flow that runs in Excel, processes the record, and does your transformation and puts it where it needs to go. And that could be multiple systems. It doesn't necessarily even have to just go from point A to point B. You could be organising a leadership spill. Or maybe you've got an au pair who's been caught at the border for someone with a visa mix-up and you need to get a rapid response around approvals. So I started putting this together a couple of weeks ago, and the leadership spill was obviously top of mind. So what I thought was maybe they could put up a survey and work out amongst the party members, do we need a leadership spill, yes or no? And then you could monitor the results, and once you got to the minimum number, yes, the spill is triggered. But of course you want revenge, so you could track who said yes and then follow up later and link to the News Limited. Beyond all that, we can obviously use custom connectors. So if your gallery is not extensive enough, you can connect to a bunch of things. So quickly whiz through the connectors that are available. So I said there's 212, but we'll start from here and go through. And what this means in the connector sense is being able to retrieve data or post data or potentially read a value or trigger some other process as well. So this is the connectors. There's also a library of triggers, so what can be wired up to a flow to initiate it. That is a bit smaller, but let's go through and have a bit of a demo. Now, are there any questions at this point? All right, so far so good. Is anybody actually thinking about a leadership spill right now? It's been a couple of weeks since we had a new Prime Minister. So in my first scenario, I have a SharePoint library, and this is going to be nothing to do with Dynamics. I have a SharePoint library, simple document library. I have a flow wired up to it so that when a new item is created, if that item is an image, it's going to call the Cognitive Services API and analyze the image, which will tell me what's in the image and return a bunch of text values, so describe the image. Then I'm going to store that back in the SharePoint library. So essentially when people upload images, I'm going to have the textual description of what is generally in that image. Now that's cool because then that content can be indexed by SharePoint later on, and when I search for things I can find them. So let's get into it. So I've got a couple of interesting photos here, and I'm going to drag and drop them into my SharePoint library. Drag one at a time. Copy that up there. Working in limited real estate here. So what's happening is that's running. Hot dog. Does anyone recognise this podcaster and SpaceX billionaire?
Yes.
Oh, I do, yeah. I'll actually just stop that there. What you can see is happening is these new ones have been loaded, and you can see it's actually updating it. In a few seconds' time, it's actually gone off to the Cognitive Services API with the image data, and these are the results that have come back. So the bulldog riding a skateboard, it's actually come back and said there was a dog, outdoor, riding, small board, grass, street. There's a bunch of information, it's in there. So that's just one simple example. You could be analysing images for OCR to detect the text that's in. You could be translating PDFs, you could do a bunch of things. Let's go and have a quick look at how that works, what the designer interface looks like. So that's the image there. I've got a lot of tabs open tonight.
The description comes back from the cognitive services as well, is that right?
Yeah, so both those two columns have been populated, and I'll just do another one where I show this car, and you might see it in action. When it's initially loaded in there, it's blank. Yeah, I can put the podcaster in. Let's see what defamatory thing comes back. We might edit this video. So initially there, that's blank, and you can see that's just got filled in with car, road, blue, street, driving, man, riding light, close-up of a car. So for those of you in the back of the room who couldn't see, that's what the car was. Let's put the podcaster in there. Man doing legal thing in legal country. And then we'll go and show you how the flow is made. We'll come back to him. So if I go now, so I'm actually now in Microsoft Flow. So the other thing to remember with this is you've got to be authenticated as a user. So it's all running under my user account at the moment. So under the flows sort of home screen here through web browser, I have a list of my flows, team flows, and business process flows, which I'll come back to later. The one that we've been running, the one that's wired up, is this one here. So when an image is added to a SharePoint document library, call the Computer Vision API. So I'll go and edit that and show you how that's made. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of being a series of logical steps. The very first thing is the trigger. And so in this example, the trigger is when an item is created. Now I've wired it up to that SharePoint document library, and there's the list of items that I'm actually monitoring. So that's 2 points of information. I'll just leave it at that. And then I've got a series of steps. So my first step, I've actually got a condition that says if the file name has JPEG, so if the file name contains JPEG, so if I uploaded something else, it's going to skip over it, ignore it, there's nothing to do, that's fine. Now I know there's more images than JPEGs, but time is of the essence. If yes, so you can see on the left-hand side here, here's our true logic, and on the right is our no logic. So I could, on the no, just ignore it, that's fine, nothing further to do, or I could return something back and say, hey, there's an error, that didn't look like an image. From there, I go through and do a series of steps where I get the file content, so retrieve me the actual image, and then send it off to the Cognitive Services API. So that's this step here. So this is where we say image content and what is it. And you'll notice when I click on here, this little dynamic content pops up on the right. Based on the previous step, Flow Designer knows what kind of things are available to you. So I haven't written any code yet. I've actually just configured a series of dialogues and connected some values and wired them up that way. This gets a little tricky, these next few steps, and I actually learnt from an existing template. So this is another cool thing with the templates. I had to do some transformation. So when we call the Cognitive Services API, it comes back with a particular format of text. So I'm doing a little bit of transformation over here. And at the end, my final step is go back to SharePoint. In the computer says column, put the output value. In the description column, put the text. If I do show advanced options, there's a whole bunch of columns available to me there. So you can tell from the computer says, so let's see what our podcaster dude says. Person, indoor, holding, man, smiling, woman, that's interesting, sitting, a person holding a microphone. Not sure that was a microphone. Oh, there's a microphone there. It's okay, he didn't inhale. Look, if I was a crazy eccentric, I'd do cool things too. So that's an example of a flow that I've used to do some analysis now. This is automated, the triggers happen whenever I do things. That's nothing to do with dynamics. I've got another simple example. I'll just show you one other thing. So in terms of monitoring the flow, when I click on it without going into the editor, you can actually see I've got a run history, so I can see when the flow has been called and what the results were. So the interesting thing is where I have failures, I can actually go into that and get the details. And it could have been, in my example here, it was actually because the image was not proper image. I don't know what was wrong with that. But you've also, at the top here, you've got this resubmit button. So you can replay this and still got the context of the particular record. So when you later on come and go, oh, overnight some record didn't fail, you can come back to the flow that failed, potentially modify the data if you need to, or fix whatever problem there is and resubmit that. So that's an interesting concept that's generally pretty hard to do when you're building all this stuff up from scratch. So this is the whole enable. These are massive building blocks to put together really cool solutions and achieve more. The other quick example I wanted to show you was a Dynamics one. So while this is off in Flow, I'm monitoring a core data service system. So I'm actually connecting to Dynamics. So in Dynamics, traditionally, if you have a parent-child relationship and you want to do a point-and-click workflow that gets all the children of a particular record or a set of records and do something, you can't do that through the point-and-click workflow in Dynamics. I know, it's 2018. You have to write some code to do that. It actually usually end up with some fetch XML and getting the results. Flow actually has a connector and an action that will allow you to retrieve a list of records and then loop through them and do something. So I'm just using this as just a demo of some of the stuff you can do in Dynamics in Flow. What I actually have is an account. So if I have an account using this wonderful sample data that everyone's probably familiar with, ADatum, what I want to do, so ADatum, I'm a big fan. If I change the address of this record, I want to cascade down and copy that value down to the child contacts, all the contacts for this account. It's a pretty simple, dinky example, but if you think about your ad hoc or from time to time data massaging or manipulation scenarios you might need to do, some of this is the fact that you can just do point-and-click configuration for this is pretty cool. So ADatum is currently based in Redmond, Washington, and if I go into the contacts associated with that, so if I go and look at Renee, it's just to show you there's nothing up my sleeve. That also says Redmond, Washington. So I'll go back to ADatum and change that to Bellevue. Save that. There's actually two contacts there. We'll go back and actually monitor the flow. So rather than look at the here, let's go back to my flows. So when a record is created, go through the records. Now, this is the part where I meant to fill the dead air while we wait for a few seconds. So the important point of this is that these are asynchronous. It's not instantaneous, but in terms of building your whole scalability, you should be looking at a lot of asynchronous based things as well in terms of rather than do a blocking call and do a synchronous workflow. This is running in the background. So let's go and see if that's actually run. Ooh, 2 hours ago. 25 seconds, there we go. It took 4 seconds to run and it's done one of those. So I can actually go into the flow, a particular instance of a flow, and actually see the records that are involved there. So you can see these green ticks means these steps were executed. So if we had logical conditions, you can see which path it followed. I can go through and see the actual record that's been updated. So the address has been set to City Bellevue and then a bunch of information there, which is a bit too detailed to go into here. But if I now go back to my records, oops, I had it already open. So obviously here it's set to Bellevue, I'm the user that saved it. When I go back and have a look at Renee's record, drum roll please, hope I got it right. Bellevue, Washington as well. So look, I know that seems like a really simple little thing. I'm copying a value from there. If it was just a one-to-one, you could do that in a one-click workflow. That's obviously straightforward. But the key point with this example was that I'm retrieving a list of records and processing them through point-and-click configuration. So I'll show you the definition of this one if I go and edit it. My trigger is when a record in Dynamics is updated. So you can even see here in the trigger, the drop-down list of instances available is based on me being a logged-in user, it knows who I am. Harv Corp, we're in the cool industries, we do lots of amazing things. And then which entity am I monitoring? So I'm monitoring all accounts. For a really simple one, I'm saying if any account's updated, do this. I could put in conditional logic, of course. In my list of records, I go, same Dynamics, but it could be something different. Get me the list of contacts, and under advanced options, I've actually got a little bit of filter. So the filter query there says, this is if you've done any OData integration, this is where your queries will be very familiar, where the parent customer ID equals account. Now account is in that cool little box, because when I click into it, you'll see the dynamic expression builder appears. This part I had to work out with a little bit of trial and error. So this part's not magical. You need to understand how you're interrogating the API. The account I plugged in there. So it's taking the account value from the parent, applying it to get me the contacts just for that account. If I didn't include this, it'd get all contacts and copy the values down. And then from there, we have this applied to each. So this is a for loop, really. So go through the results of this and do something. So apply to each, and what I'm doing inside here is updating a record. So pretty simply, I'm saying back in Harvcorp, contacts for the particular contact we're working with, go and update the city to the city. Now I could have mapped a whole bunch of fields if I was doing the whole address properly. But that's what we're doing there with that for loop. So I'm not aware of another way to do that with the native point and click configuration. You'd be running code to do a cascade list there. Okay, so that's two examples of flows in action and how we edit them and how we monitor them. I'll just show you what it looks like to actually create one from scratch. First, I'll just click create from template. You'll probably find as you're learning this and as you get started, it's easy to maybe find a template that's similar to what you need to do and then take that and adapt it. Yeah, showing around and back.
Yeah. So like when we create that flow, right, for the CRM, is that flow is running inside the CRM or is the flow running outside CRM and just monitoring the things in the CRM?
Yep, it's running outside. So the bit about in the query, I pass in the OData get parent ID. It's basically using the API, so it's outside.
So it means it also allows you to configure how often you want to go and check in whether that CRM record is updated or is prefixed. That's taken every 10 or 15 seconds or a few seconds like that.
It's a really good question. I don't know when you say a trigger and link it to when a record is created or updated. I'm not quite sure of the internal mechanics of how that works in terms of whether it's poll or there's some other kind of webhook action that's happening there. So you're not going and saying, check for this every 10 minutes. You could do that if you wanted to. That'd be a different approach. But in my simple way, I just said when a record is created. So I'm a business user. I don't have to worry about the when. I just say when it happens, and then the magic of the cloud gets taken care of. Sounds very technical, doesn't it? So yeah, there's a bunch of templates that are available to you here. You can also save your own templates. You can end up saving team templates. There's a bunch of approval workflows which are really helpful as well. So you could have records and things that happen in Dynamics or other systems, but you want to route them to approval. And there's approvals can end up with emails that go to managers who don't get hands-on with these systems, but you need their approval anyway. And it can appear in their email with a simple button where they can approve or decline. Or it could be an app on their phone where they can make an approval or not. And so then it's kind of basically a way of reaching out to these time-poor executives who aren't able to get hands-on in the system because they didn't come to the training, but to include them in your important business processes as well. So the approval stuff is quite handy. There's a whole lot in there. So if you pick any of these, you can then go and create and start modifying the template. But if we start from scratch, let's go back here. You'll also see I've got a notifier up here telling me about my failures. Just in Flow, not my failures in general, it's a longer list. Thank you. If I go and create from blank, it sort of guides me through the process of saying, well, what do you want to do? What are you trying to monitor? So for your analytical savvy power user, they can start to work through this process of, so monitoring a podcast release would be doing something where you modify a feed, but say when a file is created, when a particular record is created, you see here that's Dropbox, that's OneDrive. When a tweet is posted, you could be analysing someone's Twitter account, like the president, something like that, because that's pretty quiet, nobody knows much about him. So you've got a whole bunch of connectors there. I could say when a new email arrives, that's my trigger. Which folder am I monitoring? I'm monitoring my inbox. And then I go through and do my steps. So when I go and do a step, I've got a new action or add a condition. I can do a little bit more complex logic depending on what I need to do here. So this visual designer says allow me to do conditions almost tall enough, turn the lights on, yay. So when I get to the condition here, it's looking at the email. So it gives me a prompt here to say, well, what do you want to check in the email before you do the next step? So I could say if the body says, if the body contains Nigerian prince, I want to be notified about this stuff straight away. I want to get onto this. I don't want to let an opportunity go by. So there's my condition. I do something silly like that, and then I can go down to the next step. So again, because I've done a condition, yes, no, what do you want to do? If it doesn't, then just reply back. Boom! So everyone who sends me an email doesn't contain Nigerian prints. I can send something back. But you'll see here in my actions, this is now where our connectors come into play. So what do I want to do? I'm monitoring an email, and I might want to post a tweet. I might want to do a notification. I might want to create a contact or put a record in Dynamics or call out to another system. This HTTP connector means really you're just making a GET or a POST request. You could have a custom API, a webhook on your end that you want to notify a system about. Hey, ticket sales are through the roof, things like that. There's a whole lot of connectors there. Obviously, there's a bunch of external systems as well. You can hook into Azure Directory and a lot of things. So, in a real quick nutshell, that is how you go through and create it. I'm starting to run out of time, so I won't finish it. Yes,
just quickly, can you create more actions yourself? So if I wanted to add another application that's not on that list, how would I go about doing that?
That's a good question. I don't know all the mechanics of it. I think it will be a custom hook where you probably do a HTTP call or something like that.
I can't
So,
give it.
do you have any
Just
more?
HTTP. If you've got an endpoint you need to connect to.
Okay, so we can't say to Microsoft, oh, we're going to help you build this or something
They've
like
got
that?
a scale, right? So each of these connectors is similar to an app store.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to publish them, and they've got to
Yeah.
know they're going to work, the reliability of them to be tested.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is, I need to hook into some arbitrary endpoint
Yeah.
and use a HTTP connector,
Cool.
and then can consume that.
Okay.
So yeah, at the moment it's centralized and pushed out.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, so there's a lot of connectors available in there. As you go through and compile this, you can then do a test as well. So you can, when you go through the tests, you can go and trigger the action, or you can create the data yourself. I'm going to leave that page. Starting to, now we're going for time, I'll get cracking. You've got this on-off button as well. And the other thing to point out is these are all running in a particular environment. So in my environments at the top right here, I've got HarvCorp and I've got HarvCorp User Group. Now HarvCorp User Group is a different environment that I set up to isolate my other flows, but I'm also actually using this environment as a trial for Common Data Service. So this is why it's got this funny little name there at the end. So you could have a concept though where you had a dev, the test, and a prod list of environments within your one tenant. And so then what you can do obviously is promote them through that and do some ALM. What happens is you can export your flows, they're basically a file, you can store them in Azure DevOps, which is the artist formerly known as VSTS. And then you can import them into the next environment if you need to, that kind of stuff, or if you got really clever about it, you might actually automate that. You can also take that export and then put that into logic apps. So remember I said these things can grow up and become logic apps. I can obviously turn it on and off as well, so it's just really brutal. I don't want to run this anymore, turn it off and come back to it later. Any questions at this point before I come back and get into slides? So, yes, Ian?
You said environments. So is that when we go into the CRM admin now, the new interface, the instances are started going into the environment, so they're going to be renamed. We won't be calling them instances anymore.
No, that's specifically in Dynamics. They're still instances. This is really in PowerApps. If I didn't connect that to Dynamics, this is Flow. If I didn't connect that example to Dynamics, this could be nothing to do with Dynamics. It's the Flow environment, I guess. So it's almost part of your Office 365. So it's underneath that tenant. You can create environments there. So similar in the analogy of the instance of a Dynamics, but it's not related specifically to Dynamics.
It's an execution environment.
Yeah,
So your PowerApps
short
and
of it,
Flow and your CDS all run in the same environment. Yeah, separation you can say.
Okay, cool. All right. Back to the roller coaster of emotions that I slide decked. So I'll move on now. We'll talk about about PowerApps. So PowerApps are really coming in two main flavors, and I'll show you how that relates to Flow in the long run. But essentially, pause here, and we'll sort of change topic. This is a whole separate thing now. It's all part of the business application platform, but a Flow was. It's going to look good on the video. Me dancing. Thanks, Dan. PowerApps come in two types. There's canvas-based apps, which is apps that you design from the UI down. So you want your user interface to have a particular look and feel that's custom, essentially. You've got particular things you want to do. It may not, your app, canvas-based app might not even relate to any data. It could just be a game that you made, or it could be related to data of different sources. You've also then got your model-driven apps. Your model-driven apps is much more from anyone here in the Dynamics user group who's done configuration of Dynamics entities. You'll be more familiar with your model-driven apps. The difference is with model-driven apps, you start from your data up. So you define your entities, you define the fields in your entities, you define views and business rules associated with the entities, and then the UI for that really is a traditional Dynamics 365 user interface. So if you're not as concerned about the particulars around the UI and you're happy with that user interface, you can go with the model-driven app. But the other key difference with the model-driven apps is essentially most of your data is still in Dynamics. With your canvas-based apps, you can have connectors from lots of different sources. Similar to Flow, I can pull in data from SharePoint, I can put some data in Dynamics, I can send an email, I can monitor an RSS feed and post to an HTTP endpoint, all within the one app if I needed to. So Canvas apps give you a way to aggregate those. The Common Data Service is essentially a core set of entities that you would normally have with the Dynamics instance, but it's without the sales and app service modules on top these days. So it's essentially the bare essential entities. It's a common data service you can use to start to store data and then build your apps on, but it doesn't have things like the opportunity and the lead. It's basically got accounts and contacts. I'll show you some examples in there. If you're building an app that's model driven, you're going to be using the common data service and building up from there. When I first started hearing about PowerApps, I really kind of thought they were a thing that ran inside an app on your phone. So they do run on the mobile phone, but they definitely also run in a browser. They can run in SharePoint, so you can use a PowerApps Canvas app as a custom form in SharePoint. You can run them in Excel. As I mentioned that scenario earlier, I could have a Power App or a Flow in Excel to actually process my records, and you can run them in Teams. So I'll go through and show you those different formats there. The thing to point out with when it runs on your phone, you install the Microsoft PowerApps app from the public app store for Android and iOS, and then you log into the app with your enterprise credentials, and then the enterprise apps that have been published are available within that PowerApps app. So it's like an app container. And of course, there's a web-based designer. There was a desktop-based designer as well, but the direction has been to head towards the web. They're doing more full-featured development in the web environment. All right, so that's a fantastic slide, Craig, but how do we get to the demos? All right, I'm going to show you probably 2 demos. I don't think we'll have time for the third. So I'm going to show you a Canvas app, which is a sample app called Site Inspector. After this, you can all go home and get started for free as well and try this out. You'll see the same app. I know you're keen. And I'll also show you an example of a model-driven app, and you can probably see the differences, obviously, in the UI and also the data connectors and things. Okay, so Canvas-based app. Let me just go to one of my 300 browser windows. So here I am logged into the web interface of PowerApps. I'm in Edge here, and down the bottom, the important thing to note is I'm actually in the Canvas part of PowerApps. We'll switch to model-driven later. So here I'm at the home, and it's giving me a greeting and showing me a couple of different apps that have been published. As I hover over each of them, there's a triangle button to play, or there's an editor button. If I come down here to my list of apps, this is a bit more of a generic view of a list of things that are happening. Here's my apps that I've created. I'm going to go and actually play the Site Inspector to give you a feel for what this would look like. Now this is configured for tablet or web browser desktop environment. I'm going to say yes, you can use my location. The scenario behind this would be someone going out and doing some field inspection type work, capturing photos, recording address details. So this is the app here. I'll just say fit to screen. What's happening here is this is a sample that comes with some data. The data for this, interestingly, is stored in OneDrive. It could be stored in a database. You could be pulling it from web services. You could store this in Dynamics. But for this simple example, this is where the data is coming from. As a user, I can go through and click on different records and actually then go in and inspect them if I needed to. So let's go and have a look at Contoso building Bellevue campus. Funnily enough, that's come up again. When I click on this, now you notice the buttons are nice and big, so if you actually had a tablet, you'd be going around clicking and doing this. I'm going to go and see a record. You see it's a traditional kind of form layout where I've got my mandatory indicators and things like that. I've got text fields. I've got some capability here around entering my address. If I enter the address here, it'll actually go off to a Maps API and validate the address, or I can say use my GPS for the current location. I can view previously saved photos. I can go through and work with this data. And so you'll see this kind of feels like a bit of a bespoke app in the sense this has nothing to do with Dynamics. This is a canvas-driven app. I'll show you how that's created and how the designer for this works. I've also got a plus here, which can create a new record. Actually, what is that? No. When I go and click add photos, give it a few seconds. What's happening now is my browser is going to ask me for permissions to use my webcam. Yes, now it's defaulted in this app, it's defaulted to the back of my surface, so you can see my hand here, because there are tricks up my sleeve. I can take that photo, I can do one with the hand. So yeah, okay, this is not going to production, we need to do a little refinement with this app, but you get the concept where these apps, they're running in a browser, but they've got access to, through HTML5, things like your computer's location and your camera, microphone, if you need them to. So this opens up a whole world of possibilities around things that you can build with them. So I can work with records. PowerApps, Canvas apps have the capability for doing offline as well. There's a little bit of, you can't just sort of go, yeah, make it offline. There's a bit of work around in your saving of data and saving to different sources. You need to do a little bit of logic around that as well. So I want to make it sound like that's just a flick of a button. There's a bit to that, but it is possible. So that's a site inspection app. So that's a sample. Let's have a quick look at how that is edited. So I'm going to go into the editor now. So browser-based, the editor's going to load up. And the interesting thing you'll note too when you're editing is a lot of this starts to happen actually live as you're editing it. So I'll show you editing an existing one, and then I'll show you what that process looks like for creating a new one. You can also pick from templates and pre-made things as well. Okay, getting things ready. Is there any drum roll music? Okay, can you use my location? Yes. There's a lot of tips to say, hey, you know, if you want to learn how to use this. So if you're a first time user, you can go and follow all that. I just wanted to show that, and I'm going to say skip. So what I've got here now is I'm in the web-based editor. On my left-hand side here is a navigation of the components that are part of my app. So the parent things are actually forms, so I can expand that and see within each form. So really what's happening with these apps is you click on a button and it's showing you the form, right? So you transition between screens or forms or whatever analogy you want to use. In the PowerApps world, they're called forms. As I go through, I can drag and drop controls on them and actually do particular things. When I click on a control, such as this description, you'll see on the right-hand pane there is, I can change the name of the description, but there's properties. So if you've ever done any kind of declarative kind of configuration of things in the past, this will all be very familiar. There are rules, so I can put conditions in there to say if I enter this text, do something else. I can do advanced things here, where based on the value in this field, I might trigger a search that goes off and retrieves some other data. So in the visitor kiosk example I've got, the user is checking in and actually queries Dynamics or the Office users list to see who you're visiting and can do that kind of stuff. So you can respond to actions. So based on a user event, according to a control, you can go and do that kind of stuff. So I've got my screens here. They're in no particular order. The navigation is actually undertaken by wiring up the buttons to get you to a different form. So in this example here, I've just clicked on the cancel button, and you can see the function that's happening here is it's doing two things. Excuse me. On the click of the cancel button, so I've loaded the new inspection form, I click cancel, it says navigate back to the dashboard screen. Now the second parameter here is the screen transition, saying do I want it to be fancy or just get me there? What I wanted to show you is I click into this formula editor, it's actually got a whole lot of sort of autocomplete and auto-suggest type things as well. The semicolon is essentially now, as you'd expect, two commands in one. So I've done two things, navigate and clear the photo, so abandon the photos that we took. So that's how I wire up, as an example, clicking on a button and actually doing something such as navigating. When I click on action at the top here, you'll see navigate's one of those things. I could collect, which is store data. I could actually run a flow. Excuse me. So if we created some of those flows that are living in our flows library, and now we're building this Canvas app, we can actually call on some of that reusable logic to do things. So I could have a button in here that says, tell my boss I've met the Nigerian prince. And it goes off and sends him an email, and he gets very excited, and he comes down, and we're going to split the loot. So you can do things like, more seriously, you're probably going to say, this document's been signed, can you route it for review and approval and storage off in SharePoint or things like that. But this is where you start to be able to reuse those bits of logic that you've created. Okay, so some of the controls that are available too, that's what I also wanted to show. We insert. You've got all your usual suspects around text-based controls. You've got all your widgets around buttons and sliders and rating. You can put a timer on a form to respond to a certain event. You can put a Power BI in a tile if you needed to. You also have a gallery of things. So if I'm going to return a list of images or a list of records, display them in a gallery, go through and do that. I could do a data table. When I go and do forms, it'll actually ask me what data source am I connecting to. I can do media, such as an image to display an image. Camera control, you saw that in action. You actually do barcode reading as well for in the phone world. It doesn't quite yet work on the desktop world, as far as I know. You can display video, have an audio player, capture something from the microphone. There's a lot of things that just through point and click configuration you can have up and running in these apps that previously would have taken like lots of code and specialist knowledge to get this kind of stuff happening. So you can insert charts, and if you're graphically design challenged, you've got a bunch of icons that you can use, but also in a sense of doing things in a consistent manner. People these days are much more familiar with the hieroglyphics of the icons that we have here, so you can have consistent and sensible user interface. The other thing I find interesting around this is there's an app checker button. The app checker button will go and check that there's no errors in the formulas, but also tell you about the accessibility and whether you need to do anything in particular. So clearly this sample actually has a bunch of accessibility problems. It tells you what I can do and go about fixing those. So if you do need to design apps that are running in a browser that need to be accessible, this can help you remove any of those issues that you might have. Okay, so that's a bit of a complex example of a pre-existing Canvas-based Power App. I'm going to go and do a new one. So when I go back to my Power App Studio, I say new. It starts off with, do you want to start with data? What are you building? You've got a phone layout. I could connect to the common data service, which is really the core elements of what you see in Dynamics 365. You could connect to Dynamics 365 itself. So did you ever want to build your own mobile app for Dynamics with point and click configuration? Here's one way of doing it. You've got a bunch of other connectors you can connect to. Salesforce, it's some little startup I've heard about. It'll be interesting to see how those guys go. I wish them well. You can also start down here with a blank app, and you'll notice I've got phone layout buttons and tablet layout buttons. The important thing is that while it says tablet layout, you can obviously host this in a web browser from a desktop environment. It doesn't actually have to be out running in PowerApps, it's just through a browser. You could create a Canvas app that had a particular form that you wanted to collect data from that you could send out to your enterprise users to either do your survey or seek approval or upload your image. Remembering that it's for authenticated users. It's not like you're sending this out as an anonymous. When I also get to choose from my app, rather than blank, I can choose from app templates. So again, I can choose, let's say we're building a phone app, and it'll actually give me some suggestions for some of the pre-existing templates that are available. So this is an asset checkout. So I can have a system that goes through and lets me check out equipment. Got a budget tracker, cost estimator, employee engagement survey. You can see all these are quite polished, rich examples that you can start with. But if you're trialing out Power Apps, you can go and create these apps and put them in your environment and actually play with them and see how they're built. And then learn that way as well. It's quite helpful. So you don't always necessarily need to start from scratch. But there's some interesting common examples there. Service desk, site inspection was the thing we were just also showing, but in the tablet version, this is the phone version. So Power Apps, Canvas apps, quite powerful, obviously, pardon the pun. There's a whole world of things you can do through point-and-click configuration and quite rapid publishing in terms of, even if you just wired a couple of screens together with some buttons to do a rapid prototype in an hour to get some kind of buy-in and say, is this what you meant? It's quite good for that, but then obviously you can take it those next step further and actually start saving data in a whole lot of sources. Okay, so that's Canvas apps. Let's go back to this alternate browser. So I'm in PowerApps now, and I actually just through the magic of switching browsers, but I've actually gone into model-driven apps. So sort of pausing to change gears. So Canvas-driven apps, remember, designing the UI down. Pulling in data, maybe it's just a game, it doesn't actually have any data apart from local variables. Now we're doing a model-driven app. So all the Dynamics configurators in the room are going to start to feel a little bit of deja vu here and get pretty familiar with some of the data here. What we're doing, starting from the data model up, and then using essentially the Dynamics UI for rendering it. So if your app is going to be suitable to be rendered in the Dynamics UI, you can start with this approach if the data is more important to you. So on the left-hand side here, by switching over to this, I've also got data. Now in this environment, I've gone and enabled a trial of the common data service. So what this has created is essentially this bare base of the entities that are available through that. So when we talk about with Dynamics 365 has the sales and the service app, traditionally that was all baked in. These are actually now apps that sit on top of this. So this is your bare install. All Dynamics 365 version 9 uses this common data service first, and then things like sales and service get installed on top. So the list of entities that are available starts with account, goes down, you can see contact, you've got email, fax, letter. What's not there, as you've seen, is there's no opportunity, there's no lead. Those are things that are actually in sales. So I'll go and click on account. And when I go in here, you'll see now I've got a list of fields. So this is a different look, but it's a similar format to how you would have done configuration eventually before. I'm going to click on the field. I can actually, I don't want to delete the account number, that would be nasty. I go through, click on that, and the properties pop up on the right, and I can do all my usual things like change the display name. I can make it a required field, turn it off being searchable, all the kind of stuff that you would have normally done through your Solution Explorer in your Dynamics world before. So this is an example, I guess, of how the views are configured, the forms themselves. So I have the account form here. I can have dashboards and do a dashboard design of this particular entity in here. I can define the charts. So all these are sort of available out of the box with the common data service. And if I actually click on the data, and this is where the price of admission online, it should render the data there. So traditionally you had your solution designer and then you have another window open to actually look at your data. But here I am just by changing the tab, I can actually see the data that's defined here. At the top right, those are the same views that I was actually just looking at over here. These are available to me. So it actually now combines your data into your design space as well, which is handy to review. What does that view look like? So these fields are all available within here. So this is my list of entities. This is I know that's a really quick intro to the common data service. But let's go and have a look at the apps. So the first example I was going to show you was a sample that these 3 samples I've installed, and so you can install these yourself as well. Something called the Innovation Challenge. So I'm just going to change across here to this tab where it's already loaded. And the Innovation Challenge really is a simple sample built on the CDS that then collects ideas and has a business process flow that lets managers and people vote for ideas and go through and actually have a look at them. So you'll notice in here when I click on Dynamics 365, the 3 apps that I've got available: Innovation Challenge, Fundraiser, Asset Checkout. They're the same apps that I had published in here. I'm in the Innovation Challenge here. I'm going to go and have a look at a list of ideas. And I'm going to click on S for solar panels. Somebody submitted an idea for solar panels. And I've got a business process flow that's available to me. So create, develop, score. That's all pretty familiar if you've done business process flows. But this has been built from the ground up from the model perspective through PowerApps. So you've got your form layout with your fields, you've got your fancy sliders because this is the unified interface, and all this kind of information here. So this is going to start to feel familiar. You've also got the potential to incorporate flows into this. So if I had a flow that was linked to this entity, I'd be able to trigger a flow from here manually if I wanted to. Okay, so that's the UI, it's a unified interface in this example. If I want a pixel perfect layout and precision around that, I'll do a canvas-based one. With this one, I'm quite happy for this to be presented to Dynamics, so we started with the model-driven app. Let's go back into our apps. So I'm here, and what else have we got under entities, flows, apps? If I go and edit this, there's two things to note here. When I go and edit, this is taking us into the app designer. You might be familiar with this. We're coming at this from the PowerApps end, but you might be familiar with this if you come from the Dynamics 365 end. If you come into the app designer, you've got this visual layout here of what the elements are available through the UI and through the menu and things that are configured and included in that. So I won't go over on that too much, but that's how you would edit that app. But then if I scroll down here on the left, there's an area called Solutions. A solution sounds familiar, doesn't it? So when I click on Solutions, it's just showing me the solutions that are installed inside the common data service that I'm connected to here. There's an innovation challenge. I'm going to click on it. I cheated and had it loaded earlier. Here's a tab that shows a very familiar solution explorer with my list of entities and all the things inside it. So creating a model-driven app will probably feel very familiar for people here if you've done any kind of configuration before. Now, with some people here who've probably never done that yet, this could be, that's fine, but this is probably preaching to the choir in a sense within this room. But you've got all your traditional things around here, list of entities and all your forms and your fields and all that kind of stuff, so you can modify things in there as well. But the key thing is with a model-driven app is you can package it up as a solution and export it and import it to your different environments the same way that you do with your other processes today. So all that kind of ALM aspects remain. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. I'll wrap it up soon, and then we can go to Q&A. I'm happy to stay and answer questions. That's fine. I'm just checking if there's anything else.
Craig, what's under data there? You've got data integration.
Thanks, Dan. Good question. So under data integration, I've got a project in here, and if I go and edit that project, here's something I didn't prepare, so we're learning together.
Do you want to show the PowerApps admin?
Yes. So in here, we've basically got a query where we can pull in other data as well. So inside the PowerApps, we're actually, the common data service is still the core of this, but I can still pull in other data and push other data out. So there's another point of integration there. So this is a bit more enterprisey in a sense of it's packaged up as part of this, as opposed to a flow that's running under an individual's account. The other thing I'll click onto flows, while that's loading, here's my flows. They're available in the same interface. Remember we had my flows, we had team flows, we had business process flows. So very quickly I showed the business process flow associated with ideas. So that was the idea to project business. So if I go and edit that, it's the same app designer. If I go all the way back over to flows, so I'm out of PowerApps, I went back to business process flows, the same thing's there. So now you've kind of got these two different angles of coming up with essentially the same thing. So that's all integrated there. So this is why it's a platform of different things. Where while they've got different purposes, there's a whole lot of integration that makes your flows and your logic and your business process flows available across the platform there. Cool. So seeing, I'll have to skip the PowerApps admin. Sorry, we're running out of time. It's coming up 7 o'clock. I can show that after. So okay. Let's roll you back into, or bring down the fever pitch and go back to slides. Quick things I just want to finish off with PowerApps. There's a link on this image, so when you get the slides later, you can actually go and find the PowerApps licensing information. So these are just the public website prices, don't quote me on them. Obviously it starts on the left here with, there's some Canvas apps capability involved in Office 365. On the right, we talk about PowerApps being included in Dynamics 365. You'll also notice on the right, it talks about model-based and Canvas-based. On the left, it starts with Canvas. Kind of meets in the middle with, you can have a PowerApps plan and do the common data service and do model-driven apps without necessarily being full-fledged Dynamics. So yeah, go and check that out. There's also some information around the number of things you can execute. So we're in this sort of platform world where It's serverless. I didn't go and create a server to host my flows. I've just said, hey, create me a flow. Now, if I ran that past some ridiculous threshold that's going to get throttled, you get a certain amount of executions per month. The limits are quite large, but go and research those as well if you need to find out more information. So Dan mentioned the business apps release notes. I just grabbed some really key highlights from here. I'm not expecting you to read all this, apologies. But the key thing, or one that I think is going to be most interesting, extend Dynamics 365 entity forms with embedded Canvas apps. So you have a Dynamics 365 form with the UI, which everybody says, oh, can you change the color and can you do this control? And up until custom controls, your basic answer was no, or you put a web resource in. Coming soon in the future release, this feature will let you do your Canvas-based app and then embed that inside Dynamics. So if you've got some funky control where you want to take a photo or have some cool slider that requires somebody to do some other interaction, you can have that inside your Dynamics form by embedding that. So that's kind of be quite powerful where you build these kind of reusable apps for visual components you can then host them there. Similar kind of thing is already available in SharePoint, so they're doing that now. So all of that is this. So for more info, there's two links here. A link that compares Flow, Logic Apps, functions, and web jobs. Remember I talked about Flow can grow up into Logic Apps. And another link to release notes. We're really hammering home that release notes message. It's 7 o'clock. If anybody needs to get out, that's cool. I'll let you go. But we'll hang around and do question and answer. And as always, there's the resources. There's the links that are essentially the permalinks for our user group. And that's where we post the documents and the YouTube stuff and LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to write that URL down, write those ones down because they're going to lead you to the other downloadable content. So without further ado, I will wrap this up and hang around for question and answer. Thank you all very much for your time and your patience and your questions and your enthusiasm and all the applause breaks that we had. That was fantastic. Really love it. All right, thanks everybody. Yes, young man.
So like, this
If anyone needs to go, sorry, just if anyone does need to get up and go, feel free, it's okay.
yeah, like, I mean, this is really good, but like, suppose we need to develop in the load environment, table environment, sample environment, and we have a dynamics of load environment. Then how do we move from one environment to another environment? This PowerApp or the Flow.
Yeah,
how
so
do you deploy from one environment?
Flow you can export as a file, so basically it all comes out in a definition. That file can be saved as an artifact in your code repository. But you can then import that into your next environment.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure whether you can actually automate that through Azure DevOps or PowerShell script. It's probably not too far away if you can't already. I know the release notes do talk about improvements to the ALM around that. So that's Flow. Similar thing with PowerApps. I didn't get a chance to show, but you can export it. The same way that I can actually pick from a gallery of templates, you can export a PowerApp and deploy it to another environment as needed as well. So there's processes around that. I think you'll find it's still a whole lot of functionality being developed quite rapidly, and then some of that stuff will grow in maturity over time. So don't expect it to necessarily be as polished as the .NET framework and Azure DevOps kind of stuff. So yeah, good question. Anybody else? Yes.
Is it possible to share flows with coworkers?
Yes, great question. So if I do go into Flow in my flows, over on the right hand side there's a little icon here that actually lets me do that exact thing. So add an owner. So this is really interesting too because I created the flow, it's doing some critical bit of logic, I leave the company, they disable my account and the flow stops running. What happened? So that's kind of the swings and roundabouts of the empowering the power user and the citizen developer as we call them. You need to understand some discipline around, maybe you always share these with an admin or share them with team members, but you can definitely share them with team members so that everybody can run the month-end reports or whatever piece of logic you have there. So you can just do that. Good question though, yeah, cool. I need prizes. We all need prizes. Any others? Anybody got any ideas that have been sparked of, wow, wouldn't it be cool to do X, connect things up? Who's going to have a leadership skill?
What format is the exported flow?
Let's have a look. I think it's actually JSON if I can have a look at it. So let's export. The other thing I didn't get a chance to show is this analytics with your runs as well, so you can see what failures have happened and things like that. So I can export it as two types. So
I'm interested in the computer vision API. What have you done with this one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just got a couple of questions. About
Yeah,
that,
cool.
So.
definitely. So you can exit as a zip file, which you can then import back through the web UI, or as a JSON and take it into your Logic apps. But if you extract the zip file, you'll find, surprise, it's JSON inside. So yeah, so that's the format. But because it's nice text-based, you can store that in source code, so you can version them if you need to as well. So you can sort of see, oh yeah, this is what's changed. Good question. What's the craziest connector? Anyway, so anything else?
Yeah. Well, this is the computer vision API.
Yes.
If you've got a suite of images and you've got a new one coming in and you want to compare the new one that's coming in with others looking for something that might be similar, is there a way of doing that? Or
I would say probably. I'm not an
probably.
expert in that API.
Okay, that's cool.
In that I imagine you calculate a hash or something,
Yeah.
and then determine does the hash match? Are they very similar?
Yeah, that's similar.
There's machine learning models that do exactly
Yeah,
that.
that's
Okay.
probably better
Train
way.
itself on
Okay.
on vision, so.
So just to pull this up, while that was just one of the things I connected to, the Cognitive Services API
Yeah.
includes things like vision, which is what I use to interpret the image.
Yep.
There's speech and search and knowledge and you can read language.
Yeah.
A bunch of cool stuff. Cool.
Right.
Thanks, Dan.
So just one quick thing, I mean, it's probably one thing to point out, it looks like there's a lot of apps and a lot of platforms that have been sort of introduced here now, and because sort of put your wrap your mind around it, this is sort of the foundations for where Dynamics is going. So you sort of see that the Solution Explorer has been now exposed through PowerApps and through Flow, etc. So the technology that's being introduced now to run these services alongside Dynamics is a technology that's going to be underpinning and replacing a lot of the legacy code base and functionality in Dynamics. So you get a sense of getting used, you get familiar with these platforms now, you'll be in a much better position going forward into where Dynamics is headed in the future. Common data service is underpinning the entire solution suite, so everything does revolve around the data, which is why when you look at sort of the pricing models here, you're paying a premium to get access to Dynamics entities inside the common data service. Whereas as I said, so sure, you could look at this now and say, well, I can take myself and build myself a model-driven app today and build myself my own little CRM. Well, you can, with a limited set of information that the common data service is exposed. If I have a Dynamics license, I have the full extent, because Dynamics is built on top of CDS now. So this is sort of a sense as to how it's all going to start hanging together. Flows are going to start to replace workflows, processes, etc. So all of the tooling is now starting to be pulled apart to be reassembled to give you a view where the data in CDS is your asset, and how you want to present it and how you want to expose it is the way that you're going to then look at what my end users basically want to experience. So no longer we're going to see monolithic applications. We're going to start to see data as the asset, and how do I want to view it is the applications here that I want to look at. So that's all I want to point out.
The other point or two is for the complex stuff that still does require code, you're more likely to end up in a world where you actually write code, publish it as a Logic app and other Azure functions, so using your C# code. And this is the glue that lets your citizen developers connect and reuse some of those services as well. So it's not like we're saying no code, but it's also, there's a whole bunch of less things that you need to do with code.
But they're trying to cut back the amount of code you write, period. So the concept of where plugins used to exist in Dynamics, that's probably going to become a thing of the past when you're going down this newer technology in terms of what you can do, how you can do it.